Episode 618 of the podcast. It's Speaking America, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast presented by Betfred Sportsbook. It is Monday, November 7th, 2022. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day. When I tell you this is an action-packed episode of the Aaron Torres Pod, this might be one of those episodes you got to do an extra few laps around the office to get it all in. We are going to take a deep dive on a crazy day in college football. We're going to open. I think we could start in a few places, but I do want to start on the Bayou Saturday night. Alabama falls, final play of the game, second time in a month. This time to LSU. We are obviously going to talk about the LSU perspective, but I want to talk Bama. I do think we are at a crossroads with this program. I'm not saying the dynasty is dead, but you can't deny the negative trends around Alabama, so we're going to discuss that. From there, I do actually want to go to Clemson, well, really to Notre Dame, where Notre Dame put the smackdown on Clemson. What does this mean for their playoff picture? And really, what does it mean for the big picture as Dabo keeps juggling the quarterbacks? It doesn't work out. Fascinating deal there. We will go to Georgia, Tennessee, where all of a sudden, this result doesn't feel as bad for Tennessee, considering what happened to Alabama and Clemson. What does it mean for Tennessee? And of course, Georgia establishes itself as the number one team in the country. Finally, we'll wrap. How about friend of the Aaron Torres pod, Hugh Freeze, goes to Arkansas, gets the victory. And I'll tell you this, he said on this show there are a select few jobs that he would listen if they called. I don't know if Auburn is one of them. But if that guy didn't shoot to the top of Auburn's list, I don't know what they're looking for in a head coach. Unbelievable win. So we will talk about all of that. Busy show, fun show, few things. One, if you love the college hoops, I think we'll start to do a deep dive on college hoops on Tuesday. I know the season technically starts Monday, but I'll make my preseason picks and championship picks and all that. This just feels like too much of a college football heavy day. Also, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. We are so close to 15,000 subscribers on YouTube. Want to get there soon. I think the kids say road to 15K is what we're shooting for. And if you're listening on podcast, as always, make sure to subscribe as you already do. With that said, I do want to get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, as I just said, we could start in any number of places. We could start with Georgia, Tennessee. We could start with Clemson. But I want to start with Bama, LSU. Bama goes to LSU. Bama loses again. And as I just said a moment ago, I do think this Alabama program is at a fascinating crossroads. Doesn't mean the dynasty is dead, but things are going in the wrong direction. And by the way, LSU fans, for those of you listening, this is not an indictment on you. You guys are awesome. Brian Kelly is awesome. Brian Kelly is ahead of schedule. But I say it all the time on the show. The more interesting story is often in the losing locker room. And while there are two interesting stories coming out of this game, I do think the more interesting story is with Alabama. So let's get with Alabama. And what I'm not going to do over the next 10 minutes is break down this game play for play. Because at the end of the day, this was the Alabama that we have seen for 2 years. And what I think is disappointing about the effort itself, this was the week that it was supposed to get right? I mean, last year it's up and down. They come into this season. You think they put all that behind them. Struggle at Texas, struggle at Arkansas, struggle against A&M, lose to Tennessee. Now you're still in the playoff picture. You're at number 6 in the first poll. You're coming off a bye. Nobody is better than Nick Saban with time to prepare. And what happened Saturday in Baton Rouge? Well, let's be honest. It was the same Alabama performance on Saturday that we've essentially seen in every big road game for the last 2 years. If I had described Saturday at LSU, what would you, as an Alabama fan, describe it as? Lost opportunities early, no really explosive plays offensively, too many mental mistakes, letting an inferior team, and even LSU fans would admit that this year under Brian Kelly in a rebuilding year, that team on the other sideline did not have equal talent. Letting an inferior team giving up to stay in the game, too many big plays on defense, confusion on defense, too many penalties. This is who Alabama is. This is who they've been for 2 years now. And so you get to the fourth quarter, Bryce Young does his magical Bryce Young things, and all of a sudden you look like you have a chance to win late. Bryce Young makes an incredible play. You go up, LSU scores. Alabama kicks a field goal to send it to overtime. And then in overtime, even when you score, what happens? LSU, one play in the end zone, and then credit to Brian Big, Kelly, goes for two, gets two, and Alabama loses 32-31 against LSU. And so again, we're going to talk about LSU in a minute. This was an incredible night, and I hope every LSU fan embraced and cherished and enjoyed every moment. But to me, the more interesting story is Alabama. Because again, I know that as fans, nobody wants to do the whole Alabama's dynasty is dead. And that is not what I am going to do today. But what I will do today is say this. At this point, we have a 2-year trend that something is not right with this program. And so my question becomes, what is wrong? How does it get fixed? And what is the next era for Alabama? First of all, to go back to that point, a 2-year trend. I think there's some people that maybe aren't diehard Alabama fans or diehard college football fans that would sit there and say, Torres, you're overreacting. They have 2 losses, but how are you going to say that things are going in the wrong direction? Well, it's pretty forward. It's pretty straightforward. The facts tell us that. First off, in their last 8 games going back to last year, okay, here are the results. They are 5-3 overall in their last 8 games. Tell me any stretch in the Nick Saban era where you could say that they're 5-3 under any circumstances, any conditions ever, yet when they leave Tuscaloosa, they are a different team. 5-3 in their last 8 road games dating back to last year. And even in the wins, they're not the same Bama. 2-point win last year against Florida. 2-point win in 4 overtimes against Auburn. 1-point win at Texas this year. And now 2 losses on the road this year to go along with the loss at A&M last year. And so don't tell me they're the same team. They're 5-3. They're not as dominant on the road. I think the term that, Alabama fans used through the years was joyless murder ball, in which they basically came into your stadium and ripped your heart out. That ain't who Alabama is anymore. And frankly, it is not who they have been for a very long time. And so when I look at Alabama and I try to diagnose what is wrong, why are they not the same? By the way, I saw this stat, blew me away. How about this? First time since 2010 that this team has more than one loss prior to Thanksgiving. 2010, the last time they had more than one loss prior to Thanksgiving. So things are going into the wrong direction. And to me, I think it speaks to 2 things. What are the problems and how do they get fixed? How did we get here? How did this happen? I think in terms of the problems, what I would say is what stands out to me about this Alabama team. There is no one problem, right? And that to me is the most stunning part of all this. You think about most other teams. You could sit there and say, well, this is the issue. Tennessee, it's the secondary, it's the defense, good but not elite. USC, it's definitely the defense. Ohio State doesn't appear to have a run game right now. Michigan, do they have the explosive athletes that they need to beat the elite teams? Can they do anything other than run the ball right at you? With Alabama, I kind of just listed it. It's everything. The players don't seem to have a killer instinct. I don't think the coaches put them in the best position. And so you look at, by the way, 2 penalized, too many turnovers, all that good stuff. It's not just one thing. And so again, what I want to talk about now is really 2 things. How did we get here? How does it get fixed? Because when I just think about this Alabama situation, I think it's clear. Other people are catching up. I'm not saying they can never win again under Nick Saban, but this year is lost. They have 2 losses. It is not going to get better. Right now, they don't even control their own destiny in the SEC West. They need LSU to lose to either Arkansas or A&M. Or they're not even going to the SEC championship game. So I started hearing on Saturday night into Sunday morning, well, what happens if this? Well, what about that? Well, what if they go to the SEC championship game and beat Georgia? They need help to even get to the SEC championship game, and that's assuming that they don't lose again before the end of the regular season. And by the way, they play Ole Miss next week, and I don't feel super confident that they're going to take care of business against Ole Miss. So what has gone wrong? When I think about the situation in Alabama, 3 things stand out. Well, really 4 things have stand out as to why things just aren't right with Alabama. 1, I do think some of this is on the players. And I know they're young and we don't like to blame 18, 19-year-old kids. I get all that. But here's the bottom line. you can't say that Alabama doesn't have talent. Every single year, every single one of these recruiting classes was a top 2 recruiting class nationally. Now, last year they were number 2 behind Texas A&M, but the year before they were the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Multiple number 1 classes, multiple top 2 classes. You can't say it's not talent. So it's something between the ears. It's something going on in practice, in preparation, and I do think that's part of it. I think from the opposite perspective, I do think other schools feel like they're starting to catch up. Now, not everybody is ultimately going to catch up. Not everybody's going to beat Georgia, get to a national championship game, and beat Alabama. But at the same time, something that I keep thinking about, think about Nick Saban kind of built this blueprint, built this culture for all of these years. And I sit there and say, think about how many people got a piece of Nick Saban's playbook right now. And I'm not talking about his literal playbook. I'm talking about the metaphorical playbook, how to build an organization, how to build an infrastructure, how to kind of have that triangle that all leads towards the top. Think about everybody that has been on the inside at Alabama over the last decade and has access to what Nick Saban has done and brought it somewhere else. Kirby Smart's obviously the best example, right? Kirby Smart has basically built Bama Part 2 in Athens, and they might be better than Alabama right now. Billy Napier of Florida. I don't know if it's going to work, if it's not, but he was there for several years. He knows how to build an organization. Whether it results into wins on Saturdays, I don't know, but we're going to find out. Mario Cristobal at Miami. Don't know if it'll work, but we're going to find out. Steve Sarkisian coming to the SEC in a few years. Don't know if it'll work, but we'll find out. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Mel Tucker at Michigan State. So you go on. And where I think it's important, not only do those guys have your metaphorical playbook, but on top of that, I also think something else. Those guys are now going head-to-head with you in recruiting. And so you look at recruiting across the board. Listen, I still think Alabama probably has the most talented roster in college football. If they're not number 1, they're definitely number 2. But when I look at Alabama, one thing stands out to me. Who is the hottest coach in recruiting right now? It's Mario Cristobal, whether he should be or not. They're getting a lot of players that Alabama wanted. Georgia's recruiting at an elite level. A&M is recruiting at an elite level. So I don't know that they're getting the volume of players that they once did. I was on Sirius XM on Sunday morning with Andy Staples and Barrett Sallee, and Andy Staples brought up the interesting point of like most of the dudes that were on the field for Georgia that were ripping Tennessee's heart out, they were in Alabama's top 3, and Georgia is now ending up with those guys. So I know I'm going in a lot of different directions, but I'm trying to diagnose what's going on with Alabama. One, they've lost a lot of good coaches. Those coaches have taken the blueprint other places. And then on top of that, and I do think this is important, I do think the changes in college football are impacting it, where they're not recruiting the volume of players that they once did. They're going to other schools. I do think the transfer portal is a factor as well. Alabama lost 20 players from the transfer portal since the end of last season. Now, all of them weren't impact players, and some of them were replaced by other good players. But I do think that depth that was once there isn't there. I don't think the gap from 1 to 85 is as big as it was. But I'll be honest, if I could diagnose Alabama's problems right now, if I could say one particular thing, I'll be perfectly honest. Do you know what I think it is? I think Nick Saban whiffed on not 1, but 2 coordinator hires. And it's so interesting, right? Because one thing about Alabama and Nick Saban, he gets credit for a lot of things, being the greatest recruiter ever, the greatest winner ever, the greatest talent, evaluator ever, whatever. What I don't think Nick Saban gets enough credit for is how he has developed coaches, found coaches, and the staffs that he has surrounded himself with. I think the famous story, which I know I've tweeted out, but the 2016 national title staff, Lane Kiffin at OC, Kirby Smart at DC, Mario Cristobal is the offensive line coach, Mel Tucker's the defensive backs coach, Billy Napier is the wide receivers coach, Dan Lanning, who's now the Oregon head coach, was a GA on that team. I think I'm probably missing something. But when you look at Nick Saban, one of his greatest strengths is his ability to identify and develop coaches within his system. And you look at this team compared to previous teams, it just ain't clicking from the coaching perspective. And so I do think if I had to blame 2 people more than anybody, it's probably Bill O'Brien, the offensive coordinator, and Dan Lanning, the defensive coordinator. Not Dan Lanning, Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator. I apologize. But I bring it up because you look at this offense. Think about the offense right now. They are if they have even average quarterback play, they're probably 5-4 this year. People say, oh, they're two plays away from being undefeated. They're 2 plays away from being 5-4. And Bryce Young absolutely carried them in the Texas game that they won. Now, he didn't play against A&M, but he absolutely carried them in the Texas A&M game. And so I look at this situation in Alabama, I think it falls on the coordinators. Bill O'Brien just isn't good enough, especially, by the way, when you look at the fact that he followed Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian. And Steve Sarkisian, you look at what he's done with that offense at Texas, it's unbelievable. From the defensive perspective, again, I'm not X's and O's guy. I'm not scheme guy. But what I am is a guy with 2 of these. And for those of you not watching on YouTube, I'm pointing at my eyeballs. It's not good enough. They don't look prepared. They don't look disciplined. One, the penalties speak for themselves. I mean, the penalties speak for themselves. Another 9 penalties on Saturday night. This remains, in terms of penalties per game, one of the most penalized teams in all of college football. This is a team that cannot get off the field because they shoot themselves in the foot. Most of it is discipline, all sorts of stuff like that. By the way, last in the SEC, 125th nationally in penalties, okay? So they look undisciplined. They look confused. Tennessee, they look completely lost. The last play in the LSU game, they looked lost. And so to me, that's really what it boils down to. I think some's the players. I think some is that other coaches have Nick Saban's blueprint. And I think some is that they've lost a lot of really good players either through the portal or in recruiting in recent years. But the talent is good enough to not be losing to this particular LSU team. But to me, it comes down to what I just said. It comes down to, I don't think Nick Saban has done well in developing and evaluating these 2 particular coordinators. And I think if we want to talk about getting things fixed, if we want to talk about, is Bama ever going to be a title contending team again? I do think this is where it starts. And I don't have the answers as to who would fix things. But the one thing that I think Nick Saban has done better than anything, it's obviously, develop coaches. But the other thing that he does really well, he is a great, you talk to people in football, he is a great self-scouter. In other words, he looks at his team, he looks at their strengths, their weaknesses, and he figures out, how do we get better? How do we get better? How do we fix things? How do we get back on track that we need to? And so I look at the situation. I think it's going to be an interesting couple weeks coming out of this season. I think it's going to be an interesting couple weeks as he evaluates the offense. How can it get better? How can they have an identity? How can they better take advantage of all their players? But then the defense as well, because it's just not good enough with Pete Golding. So I don't want to get to the LSU perspective right now. But I got to say, man, you talk about just a disappointing effort from Alabama and Nick Saban. And I'm telling you, man, I know we just went in a lot of different directions, but I think there is a lot to peel back from Alabama's perspective. All right, really quickly, I do want to look at things from the LSU perspective. And we went a little heavy on Bama to start things off. But look, Bama right now is at a very fascinating crossroads. But I would also be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about LSU. Now, we talked a ton about them after the Ole Miss game. So some of this, I need to contextualize what Brian Kelly, because what he is doing right now is so freaking incredible that I cannot believe it. As LSU, not only are they 7-2, but they're 7-2. They control their own destiny in the SEC West. And right now, they are probably going to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. Don't know if they're going to get there. Don't know what will happen once they get there. But this is an incredible season. And as a guy who always liked Brian Kelly, let me tell you this. This thing is so far ahead of schedule. This is one of the best coaching jobs that I've ever seen, and I'm just blown away by it. First of all, you look at this whole situation at LSU. I think it's easy to say whether you thought Brian Kelly was the guy, whether you didn't. The bottom line is he inherited a mess at LSU. And I know it's LSU. They always recruit well and all that. I get all that. What I would also say is the LSU at the end of 2021, it wasn't the LSU. It wasn't your older brother's LSU. It wasn't your granddaddy's LSU. It wasn't Joe Burrow's LSU. It was a mess. I've talked about it before, but we have to reiterate this. The last time we saw LSU prior to this season was in a bowl game against Kansas State in early January last year. In that game, LSU had 39 scholarship players on the field. 39 scholarship players because of injuries, because of transfers, because of NFL draft, because of whatever. 39 scholarship players. They were playing a wide receiver at quarterback. That was the program that Brian Kelly inherited, and that was the mess that he inherited. And I don't know how he has done it so quick. Taken in 20 plus transfers. He's got 2 starting offensive linemen that are true freshmen, transfer quarterback from Arizona State that got benched last year. So they are, listen, I think most of us thought realistically LSU could get back to a certain level, get back to potentially winning the SEC West, get back to competing for national championships, where I don't think they are. None of us thought it would be this year, not with what he inherited. Because of it, it is, I have to say, maybe the single most impressive coaching jobs in a season that I have ever seen. Now, we've seen great program building. Mark Stoops comes to mind. We've seen great turnarounds from one season to the next. But in season, are you kidding me? Do you remember what this team looked like against Florida State in week 1 on Labor Day weekend? Penalties, mistakes. They couldn't run the ball. Jaden Daniels was basically their entire offense, and he couldn't throw it. Missed tackles after the game. Missed field goals, by the way, that cost him a game. Missed extra points. After the game, you have players deleting stuff off social media. That is the same group of guys that we saw on Saturday night. And you look at the improvement. You look at how much crisper the offense runs. You look at the lack of mistakes, the tackling. I've never seen anything like this. As far as other thoughts, other reactions to this one, a couple things do stand out. One, did you see Brian Kelly's post-game speech? That stuff sent chills down your spine if you ever played college or ever played football or sports at any level. What I would just tell you, find the 5 minutes to go watch it, because he basically looks his guys in the eyes and says, look, that's a great team over there. We went for 2 because I didn't want to leave any doubt. I didn't want to leave any doubt in you guys believing in me. I wanted you to know that I believed in you. And there aren't any other group of guys that I go to war with. And I didn't want to walk in this locker room and say that we left it out on the field, that we had a chance and we didn't win. So congrats to Brian Kelly. Congrats to this team. And as I close out this segment, again, we've talked a lot about LSU. This is incredible. And we understand a couple things. As great as this is, they still have to take care of business at Arkansas, at A&M to win the West. And on top of that, this is still a team that is probably, as we're going to talk about with Georgia in a minute, 2 or 3 recruiting classes from really playing at the highest levels of this sport. At the same time, 2 things come to mind as I wrap up this segment and I think about last night. One, I am so glad Brian Kelly had the you-know-what to come to LSU, because as I've said many times, I have been a supporter of Brian Kelly. I have said that I don't believe that in the modern era of college football, anybody should be winning at the level that Brian Kelly did, where basically the only losses that they ever had were to Alabama, Clemson, who ironically Notre Dame beat on Saturday night, and playoff teams at Georgia, at Michigan. I mean, you talk about the losses that this guy had at a small Catholic school in Indiana, no natural recruiting base, academic standards, nobody should be this good. But if he didn't have the guts to bet on himself, if he didn't have the guts to say, you know what, I believe I can win at the highest level, we wouldn't have known that. And imagine this guy retiring and this is where he was headed. He was going to retire as the greatest coach in Notre Dame football history, but the guy that everybody else in college football saw as the dude that couldn't win the big one. Well, turns out he could win the big one. He just needed the dudes, and he needed a full deck. He needed a full deck, or he needed the point I'm trying to make is that he was playing with one arm behind his leg when he's at Notre Dame, one arm behind his back. And so to see him on an equal playing field with Nick Saban, with Kirby Smart, with all these guys having all the same resources, all the same facilities, access to the same players, I think it's going to be interesting to watch over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And finally, what I would say is I think Saturday night showed why Brian Kelly so desperately wanted this LSU job, why so many people in the media say this is one of the 2, 3, 4 best jobs in the country. 100,000 people in Baton Rouge, crazy environment, crazy fan base in a good way, by the way. And again, they're doing this all right now with a patchwork roster, transfer quarterback, young offensive line without their best defensive lineman, Mason Smith. It is unbelievable. And it's scary for me to think, what could this program look like in another year or two? What could this program look like with 2 more years of the structure and what Brian Kelly brings and a little bit more depth, a little bit more talent? it's scary to think. And so for those of you who thought Brian Kelly was a bad fit, for those of you who thought he'd never make it, for those of you who made fun of him because of his accent, who's laughing now? Everybody's part of that family. I don't even know how he said it, but everybody's part of that family. Incredible. I'm actually happy for the guy. Don't know him, never met him, but I thought this guy took way too much crap for way too much long. He had his moment on Saturday night. Congratulations to him. Really quickly, do want to take a quick break. Do want to come back. I want to talk about the other big result on Saturday night that shakes up the playoff picture. Clemson losing to Notre Dame. Not good. We are going to discuss that. We'll be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, I want to welcome back our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Listen, I've told you all about Betfred since we started with them at the start of football season. They began in the UK, 1967, one of the most respected shops in the UK, over 1,600 shops in the UK. And since they've come to the United States, they have made a major splash. They are the gambling sponsor of the Cincinnati Bengals, of the Denver Broncos, of the Colorado Rockies. And what I love about Betfred is nobody does more for their customers than Betfred and the Betfred Sportsbook. Listen, I've told you all about it, but the Betfred suite at all the Cincinnati Bengals games is hopping. We, the Aaron Torres pod, have sent people to Denver Broncos VIP tailgates before their games. Mattress Mac, we were with Mattress Mac at the World Series over the last 2 weeks because that is what we do for our bettors, and this is what we're going to do for you. Betfred has a special offer for all listeners of the Aaron Torres podcast. This is what you got to do. Download the Betfred app. Bet $50 on any game, any team, whatever you want, whoever you like. Bet 50. Get $250 in free bets, courtesy of Betfred. It could be NFL, college football, college basketball that has now started, NBA, whatever you want. Bet 50, get $250 in free bets, courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. They are the best sportsbook going. I love working with them, and I can't thank Betfred Sportsbook enough for being our presenting sponsor. All right, everybody, I'm back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears to the other big result. Really, there were two other big results in the college football playoff picture outside of Alabama, LSU. We'll get to Georgia, Tennessee in a second, but I do want to start with Clemson, Notre Dame. Clemson goes to cold, chilly South Bend, Indiana as a 3.5-point favorite, undefeated, number 4 in the country, and with an inside track to a college football playoff berth. And they walk out with a 35-14 loss that was an absolute butt kicking. This game was not as close as the final score indicated. Notre Dame was actually up 28-0 in this game before Clemson tacks on a few scores late and walks out with their first loss of the year. And I do want to break this down. I do want to talk about this game from all angles. And I do think there's more than one way to look at this. One, I heard a lot of this, well, Clemson's playoff hopes are absolutely gone. Well, no, they're not. And we'll get to that in a second. But to me, more importantly, I do think it really speaks to a conversation that we've really had throughout this podcast throughout the last few years. And I think we're going to have going forward starting today. What is this Clemson program going forward? And will we ever see them get back to the level that they were once at? And I know it feels grand and overwhelming and all this and all that. I do think it's a fair conversation to have on a day like today. And when I look at, to go back to Saturday, when I look at this game, there are two really concerning things that stand out to me about this loss for Clemson. One, really since Trevor Lawrence left 2 years ago, last season and this season, when Clemson has struggled, there's really been one thing that you could point to as the reason why Clemson struggled and the reason that they were even competitive to begin with. It was almost always the quarterback play and almost always the defense kept them in the games. And DJ Uiagalelei simply did not do enough at the quarterback position. Well, DJ was not great on Saturday. Let's make one thing clear. Under 200 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Again, that touchdown obviously came late. But they lost in all phases of the game. And I think most importantly, their defense really let them down. Now, the pass defense really had not been good for big chunks of this season. We saw it against Wake Forest earlier in the year. But at the same time, you could count on the run defense. I remember there was 2 weeks in a row. I think they played Boston College and NC State maybe, where they gave up like a combined 85 yards rushing. Well, that wasn't the case on Saturday night where they got their butt kicked at the line of scrimmage. Notre Dame, this is incredible. 47 rush attempts for 253 yards rushing. And so you look at that. Let me read that again. 47 rush attempts, 263 yards rushing, We are talking about 5.5 yards per carry. We're talking about 5.5 yards per carry on almost 50 rush attempts. That is absolutely insane. And it speaks to how bad this run defense was, which was a strength, but it's now worth noting this is the second time in about a month where the run defense has let them down. They struggled against Florida State, were able to get out of that game with a win. But this is the second time in a couple weeks that the run defense has let them down. The pass defense hasn't been good for most of the season. More importantly, just because you can't blame all of the problems on Saturday night at Notre Dame on the quarterback position, the quarterback position is maybe less stable and it's as confusing as it's really been at any point in each of the last 2 years. And it really goes back to, if you remember, 2 weeks ago, Cade Klubnik is the backup. He was the number 1 rated high school player in America. And he came in late in that game against Syracuse before the bye week and led that team to victory. Now, he only threw 4 passes, but the offense was clearly different with him on the field. They played with more confidence. They scored a bunch of points. They win going away. Still, after that game, Dabo was quick to say, DJ's my guy. There is no quarterback controversy. I have my starting quarterback. Well, what did Dabo do on Saturday? He played DJ as he said he would. DJ struggled, under 200 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And then when he struggled, what did Dabo do? He went back to Cade Klubnik, who proceeded to throw 1 pass, have it intercepted, and then Dabo took Cade Klubnik, the backup, out after 1 pass and put DJ back in. Surprise, surprise, neither worked. The offense stunk. And I'll say this, you talk about a quarterback controversy. I think you have a quarterback headache now because you've mismanaged this so much that I don't know how either quarterback can have confidence right now. DJ's got to be looking over his shoulder, and then Cade Klubnik's probably sitting there saying, can I get a fair shake at this? Like, if you think I'm the guy, then let me prove it, but you can't keep going back and forth and back and forth. And so when I look at the bigger picture with Clemson, defense struggles, quarterback situation's a mess. It does lead me to a few things. Now, one thing I do want to be clear on right now, this second, we got to stop with the Clemson's eliminated from the playoff talk. No, they're not. In the history of the college football playoff, which started in 2014, we talked about this a few weeks ago. There is a grand total of 1 team that was a Power 5 conference champion that did not go to the college football playoff with 1 or 0 losses. It was Ohio State in 2018, and that was only because Notre Dame, Clemson, Alabama, and Oklahoma all finished with 0 or 1 losses, and Ohio State had the worst resume out of all of them and the worst loss out of the teams with a loss. So don't tell me that Clemson is eliminated from the playoff berth. If they run the table, they are going to, at the worst, be in the conversation and at the best be in. Now, they could use help like everybody else. They could use Tennessee somehow tripping up from here, eliminating a second team from the SEC. They could have Georgia winning out would probably help them, eliminating anybody else from the SEC, although I don't think there's anybody from the West at this point that can get in. They could have TCU lose would help them. The point is they help. They could get help, but it's not necessary. But I also do think we also have to ask a fair question. They're not eliminated, but what makes us think that they're going to actually run the table? They're playing a Louisville team next week, and people laugh at Louisville. Scott Satterfield, they've won 4 games in a row. Louisville has. Louisville 6-3 and has won 4 games in a row, including beating a couple good teams, Wake Forest, Pitt. James Madison's actually a pretty decent team. That Louisville team is no pushover. Clemson still has South Carolina. And if Clemson gets to the ACC championship game, they are going to have a tough test against a good North Carolina team who is running away with the other side of the ACC. So their playoff hopes aren't done. But I see probably another loss on this schedule, just like with Alabama. Alabama could still get into the SEC championship game. They need help just to get there. But what makes us think, what are we so certain that Alabama's going to crush Ole Miss next week? I don't see it. I don't know. And it's the same with Clemson. I do think, though, in the bigger picture, I got to be real. A lot of the conversations that we had about Clemson in the offseason coming into the year are coming to fruition. And I'll just be blunt. I'm worried about where they are. But more importantly, I'm worried about where they are going as a program. And again, I know it seems totally dramatic and this and that and the other thing. Well, Here's my problem with this. Clemson forever has been a team built on really three things: having elite quarterback play, having elite defensive play, and playing in a pretty soft ACC. And Clemson, and I've talked to people around that program, people that cover that program, Clemson for years, they basically used the ACC regular season to work out the kinks to get themselves ready for the playoff. Well, over the last year or so, we've seen what Clemson looks like without an elite quarterback. They've been okay, really good, beat a lot of bad teams, but they are not great, and they are not a championship contender. They weren't last year when they lost 3 games in the regular season. And I think even this year, I think most of us knew that they might get to the playoff, but they're not going to win any games once they get there. The saving grace, though, I think for most of us or people that care about Clemson, I do think there was a situation where we sat there and said, yeah, it's not pretty now, but wait until Cade Klubnik becomes quarterback. Well, unless Dabo has completely changed who he is and how he runs his program over the last year or so, I have to wonder if Cade Klubnik's the guy. And let me tell you why. Because Dabo Swinney has had 2 elite first-round NFL caliber quarterbacks in his time at Clemson. Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. You probably heard of both of them. Deshaun Watson was starting by the middle of his freshman year, got hurt, didn't play, but was named the starter. Like, he at some point had established himself as by far the best quarterback, and Dabo just said, I'm pulling off the Band-Aid. I don't care. You're the best guy. You give us the best chance to win. I'm putting you in. Same thing with Trevor Lawrence in 2018. Famously, Kelly Bryant started a bunch of games. Trevor Lawrence comes out. Kelly Bryant quits the team. Everybody freaks out. Should he have? Should he have not have? But the point was, Dabo said, I have seen what Kelly Bryant can do for me, and Trevor Lawrence gets me to another level. And so my concern if I'm a Clemson fan, my concern if I'm an ACC fan, my concern if I care about Clemson football in any way, if Cade Klubnik was that guy, wouldn't Dabo have made the move and handed over the keys and said, you're my guy, go win us ball games? He's done it twice before, and I would think that he would do it again if Klubnik is the guy. But then more importantly, my other thought is this. This was supposed to be the bridge year. Like, we all understood DJ's probably not it. And Klubnik is it, and we're going to see it on full display in 2023. Here's the bigger problem. The defense was supposed to be so good that it really didn't matter. And the defense was supposed to be so good that it could carry them to a potential playoff, even if the quarterback play wasn't great. Well, we saw that defense on Saturday, and it wasn't very good. And it really, as I said, was really the third time that the defense looked kind of meh. Looked really meh against the pass against Wake Forest, looked kind of meh against Florida State in the run game, and looked really bad on Saturday night against Notre Dame. And so now, again, the question becomes, if you don't have elite quarterback play, and there might not be one in the program, and 2, if you don't have elite defensive play, then what are you as a program? And what you are as a program at Clemson, where you recruit at such a high level, you're probably still really good. You're probably still going to win a ton of games in the ACC. You're probably realistically going to win 9, 10, 11 games every year, maybe make a playoff every once in a while. But Dabo has set the standard. The standard is national championships. Maybe not every year, but we have a team good enough to get to the playoff, and probably every 2 to 3 years, we have a team good enough to win it, if not more. And so I bring it up because I think this Clemson program is at a fascinating crossroads, and I don't know what this program looks like going forward. Now, I don't even know what it looks like going into next week. I think at this point, you rip the Band-Aid off, you go with Cade Klubnik. We all knew DJ was supposed to be a 3 and done. We all knew Klubnik was the guy for 2023. But again, if I truly believe if Dabo thought he was the guy, he would have gone to him by now. And the fact that he hasn't, maybe that says something. But fascinating situation at Clemson. Again, keep in mind, they don't control their own destiny for a playoff berth. But if they win out, they're going to be in good shape. The question is, can they win out? Again, Louisville's a good team. North Carolina is a really good team. South Carolina is a good team. I'd keep this in mind too in the back of your head. A couple of their nice wins don't look so good anymore. Wake Forest suffered its 3rd loss of the season on Saturday, 2nd straight loss. On top of that, there was another loss as well that did not look good. So when I look at Clemson, you know, those big early season wins, again, Wake Forest doesn't look as good. Syracuse lost again, does not look as good. And then at the same time, what is the state of this program? Can they turn around not only this year, but in the bigger picture? All right, so what I want to do want to take a quick break, do want to come back, and do want to hit on the fascinating game between Georgia and Tennessee. Again, I pushed it back because it feels like the narrative changed a little bit after Tennessee, after Clemson and Alabama lost. But I want to talk about Saturday, what it means for Georgia, what it means for Clemson. Going to take a quick break. What are we going to be? Be right back. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute. But before we do, I want to welcome back the sponsor of our Aaron Torres Pod NFL Pick'em Challenge, Bracket Fanatics. Here's the deal. I've told you about Bracket Fanatics before, but I am going to tell you again. We worked with them in the NCAA tournament each of the last 2 years. I love working with them. And what I love about Bracket Fanatics, they are just giving away cold hard cash to listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod. We are running a weekly NFL Pick'em pool. We are giving out weekly winners a $100 cash prize and a season-long $1,000 cash prize for the person who has the most correct picks over the course of the season. If you have not signed up, I know week 9 is done, but it is not too late, okay? What's what you got to do? Go to bracketfanatics.com. Join Bracket. The bracket name is Torres. Now, look, you're going to have some ground to make up in the season-long $1,000 cash prize, but you can still do it. I got faith in you. I really feel like you're going to be able to handle it. But if you haven't signed up, do it now. Because you could still be entered to win the $1,000 season-long cash prize, and we're handing out $100 weekly winners. So even if you haven't signed up yet, you can take advantage of that for the next 9 weeks of the NFL regular season. Go to bracketfanatics.com, join bracket name Torres. If you have not signed up yet, it is not too late. And if you have signed up, make sure to make your week 10 picks. Love working with Bracket Fanatics, bracketfanatics.com, join bracket name Torres. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. One last game that I do want to get to before we get to some Hugh Freeze stuff, who just beat Arkansas at Arkansas. Let me say this. You know it was a great day of college football with a lot of marquee, major, impactful results. When it is about, 35 minutes into the show, and we're just getting to a little ho-hum matchup of number 1 versus number 3 Tennessee at Georgia. Unfortunately, as much as we hyped this game, it really didn't quite live up to expectations. Final score in this one, Georgia a lot, Tennessee a little. It was actually 27-13, and it really wasn't that close. And so part of the reason I'm not talking about it wasn't a great game, and I do think part of it is it's important to note that Tennessee, as disappointing as it was really helped by some of the later results. So I want to talk about Bama. I want to talk about Clemson before we got to Tennessee, but let's break this game down because it was an interesting game. It was obviously a very hyped game, a game that I was excited about. I'll be honest. One thing about me, people, I never BS you. I never lie to you. I never talk out of both sides of my mouth. Well, I thought Tennessee was the best team in the country. I thought they were going to win this game. Did not happen at all. And I'll tell you when I knew that it was not going to be good. Opening drive, Georgia fumbles the football. Tennessee recovers. 1, they are held to a field goal. That wasn't a good sign right there. But the second possession, Georgia just starts running the ball right at Tennessee, and Tennessee can't really stop them. I guess it was technically the third possession, but early in the game, you could see Georgia just right at Tennessee, and you're like, oh man, this could get bad, and it did in a hurry. 14-3 after the first quarter, 24-6 at halftime. At that point, the rain starts coming down. Kirby Smart basically calls off the dogs, basically says, we are going to run the ball a lot. We are not going to put the ball in harm's way. They're up by as many as, they're up 27-6 going into the fourth quarter. Tennessee scores a touchdown late. So this was just a butt kicking. Poor Hendon Hooker. Listen, I'll say this. I still think Hendon Hooker's the Heisman favorite. It's a 16-17 week award. It's not going to be won or lost in this game. But this poor kid just had absolutely no time. Finished with 195 yards passing. Tennessee, a team that came in averaging close to 550 yards per game, was held almost in half at 289. 2 for 14 on third downs, 5 yards per completion. That explosive offense just could not get anything going against Georgia. And so when I look at this game, listen, from the Georgia perspective, or really from the big picture perspective, I guess what I would say is that there are really only 2 quick thoughts that I have on this game. And, from the Georgia perspective, then we'll talk a little bit about Tennessee. But from the Georgia perspective, a couple things. One, this game, more than any other game that maybe I've ever seen, is proof that recruiting rankings matter, right? Tennessee is a great story with a great quarterback and I believe a great head coach who is going to continue to elevate that program to places that they haven't been in a long time. But they are still a team that lost 30-plus players in the portal a year and a half ago after Jeremy Pruitt was fired. This is a young team, a team that's brought in a lot of players from a lot of places through the portal in their own right, playing a lot of young people, and they are playing a Georgia team that is an elite recruiting machine and has been since Kirby Smart got there. Just for fun, I went and looked back at the recruiting rankings for the last 4 years. Let me read them to you. Georgia's last 4 seasons in recruiting. In 2022, they had the number 3 ranked class. This all according to 24/7 Sports. The number 3 ranked class in 2022, the number 4 ranked class in 2021, the number 1 ranked class in 2020, the number 2 ranked class in 2019. Last 4 classes, 4 top 4 classes, 3 top 3 classes, and a number 1 recruiting class in the country. Tennessee, on the other hand, here are their last 4 recruiting classes. Ranked number 17 in 2022, ranked number 22 in 2021, ranked number 11 in 2020. That doesn't sound bad, but of course that was really one of the few classes signed by Jeremy Pruitt. And I looked it up. 3 of the top 4 players transferred from that class after Jeremy Pruitt left. In 2019, it was much the same. Number 13 in the country, but a bunch of players left after Jeremy Pruitt was fired. And so if you watch this game, this was just a great, I don't think 24/7 Sports has ever had a better moment in time than this game because you just saw the difference. I mean, think about this game and think about one place where Tennessee looked like they matched up with Georgia. Tennessee's receivers who have been so great could do nothing against Georgia's DBs. Because of it, Tennessee's O-line could not match up with the Georgia defensive front. Georgia's offensive line gave Stetson Bennett, all day to throw in the pocket. Their running backs had huge lanes. Their running backs are breaking tackles against the Tennessee, linebackers and secondary. That's not a knock on Josh Heupel. He inherited a mess. It shows actually how far he's brought this program, but it shows what a team, again, that has a great quarterback and a great head coach looks like versus one that is stacked one recruiting class on top of the other. And so this game is ultimately why recruiting matters. It's not about one player. It's not even about one class. It's about doing it again and again and again and again so you can withstand injury, so you can have depth, so you can have guys that the competition in practice changes. This is why it's so important. By the way, not to change the subject, this is why the Alabama loss is so disappointing. Because yes, they've lost a lot of players through the portal, but it's not an excuse. They still have by far way more talent than LSU, got embarrassed. But back to Tennessee, Georgia, because I think that's my number 1 takeaway. This is the best advertisement yet for why recruiting matters. Secondly, the only other real takeaway I have from the Georgia perspective, listen, we're going into week 11. Saturday was week 10. We've spent about the last 6 weeks trying to convince ourselves Georgia wasn't the number 1 team in the country, right? Think about it. Week 1, Georgia crushes Oregon. Week 3, they crush South Carolina. And ever since then, and remember, after the South Carolina game, we were talking, is this Georgia team better than last year? Now, I don't think they are, but they are playing with an edge to them. And so after that, though, we started trying to convince ourselves that somebody other than Georgia was the best team. Maybe it was Bama. Maybe it was Ohio State. Maybe it was Tennessee. Oh, my goodness, Georgia had a bad half against Missouri. What does it all mean? Well, it means nothing. They're the best team in the country, and it's not even close. And I have the stats to back it up. Because if I told you, this is incredible. So Georgia's beaten 2 teams currently ranked in the top 10, Tennessee and Oregon. But what's incredible is, I think because Oregon doesn't play, they play in the Pac-12, whatever, their offense is incredible at Oregon, okay? So you know that right now, Monday after Georgia took care of Tennessee, you know who the top 2 offenses in college football are? Tennessee has most total offense. Oregon is number 2, believe it or not. Oregon is averaging 520 yards per game. Tennessee, 523 yards per game. Georgia held Oregon to 317 yards, 200 yards below their average, and Tennessee to 289 yards. So Tennessee came in with they now average 523 yards per game. Georgia held them to 289. Oregon is averaging 520 yards a game. Georgia held them to 317. By the way, number 2 and number 3 scoring offenses in college football. Tennessee has not scored fewer than 34 points in any game. Georgia held them to 16. Oregon hasn't scored less than 41 points in any game. Georgia held them to 3. And so listen, I don't know how this season is going to play out. Maybe Tennessee gets back and beats them. Maybe Alabama or LSU shocks them in the SEC championship game. Maybe it's Ohio State, Michigan. Maybe it's somebody else. But at the end of the day, we spent a lot of time talking about Georgia, a lot of time trying to pretend like they're not the best team in college football. They made a statement on Saturday. They still wear the crown, and somebody's going to have to come take that crown. But I'll tell you this, college football national championship, this game this year is at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. I will be there, and I expect the Bulldogs to be there with me. How about my dogs? All right, really quickly from the Tennessee perspective, I'll be honest. If the results in the Alabama and Clemson games did not happen, we probably would have led this because it was a bad day for Tennessee losing to Georgia. They now don't have the inside track at the SEC East title. As a matter of fact, with 2 games left in the regular season, or there's 3 games left in the regular season, Georgia has 2 SEC games left. For Tennessee to get to the SEC championship game, they would have to beat all 3 teams left on the schedule, and Georgia would have to lose its last 2 SEC games at Mississippi State, at Kentucky. That is not happening. So Tennessee lost the race in the SEC East. They're probably not going to make the SEC championship game. And it was a bad day, from the playoff perspective, because Tennessee is a 1-loss team. You're sitting there looking after this game and saying, what is our pathway? There were a lot of teams blocking them, right? Obviously, Georgia, Alabama as a 1-loss team, if they were to win out, would have probably surpassed Tennessee because at that point they would have beaten LSU and Georgia. Is LSU a factor in the West? Obviously, Michigan and Ohio State, Clemson, TCU, maybe a 1-loss Pac-12 team if they win a conference championship. And so I bring it up because really it was a tough night for Tennessee that got better as time went on. Clemson loses. I'll tell you, by the end of the season, Clemson is not going to have wins that match up to Tennessee. Now, that's assuming, again, as we just discussed, that Clemson actually takes care of business the rest of the way, but that is a great sign for Tennessee. I think a 1-loss SEC Tennessee team probably gets in over Clemson based on how Clemson lost on Saturday to an unranked Notre Dame team versus Tennessee going on the road to the number 1 team in the country. Alabama losing. Weird because it hurts Tennessee's best loss, but because Alabama lost to LSU, it actually helps Tennessee as well. So Tennessee now with the Alabama loss, Alabama's out of the playoff picture, and we talked about it. Everyone's going to try to twist it, and well, if they do this, and what about that? Alabama doesn't even control their own destiny in the SEC West. So let's stop talking about, well, what if they get to the SEC championship game and beat Georgia? They got to have LSU lose first. They got to make sure to beat Ole Miss first. Then they're going to go to Atlanta and beat Georgia. Did you just watch Alabama? Have you watched Alabama all year? Have you watched this Georgia team? So they're out of the picture. And Michigan and Ohio State are going to play each other, and neither team is going to have the resume that loses that game that Tennessee does. So if you're a Tennessee fan, listen, you don't want to lose, and you certainly don't want to lose the way that you did, but you got to feel a lot better right now than you did at about 7:15 Eastern time on Saturday. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of football to be played. Again, you could lose another loss. You could use another loss from Clemson. You could certainly use at least 1, maybe 2 losses from TCU. But Tennessee fans are in much better shape than they were earlier today. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. Good to be back. Final segment of the show. So good to be back. And I do want to wrap. There was a few other results from the weekend that maybe are quickly worth going over really quick. One, how about my UConn Huskies? Beat UMass on Friday night. Now sitting at 5-5, need 1 more win to get bowl eligible. On top of that, Ohio State, I know Ohio State, jumping from UConn to Ohio State is pretty crazy, but Ohio State, I'm a little worried about them. They haven't really looked good really the last 3 weeks. CJ Stroud has struggled the last 3 weeks. They beat Northwestern. I don't care that the weather conditions were bad. It was way too difficult. Northwestern is not good. It should not have been that challenging. But with that said, we can save those conversations for another day. And by the way, maybe Ohio State's a midweek conversation. I think it might be worth looking at that point. But instead, what I want to do is I do want to focus on a result that I did not expect to talk about at all on this episode of the Aaron Torres podcast, and that was the Liberty-Arkansas game on Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville. Liberty, led by Hugh Freeze, who's been on this podcast many times, including last week, walked into Fayetteville as a 13.5-point favorite. And how about this? They walked out with a 21-19 win, third-string quarterback for Liberty. Worth mentioning that Arkansas run game that no one can stop, Liberty holds them to 144 yards rushing And Liberty pulls off the stunner against Arkansas Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville. But why I want to talk about the conversation, listen, Arkansas is 5-4, whatever. Liberty, great story at 8-1 as they ironically get set to play my UConn Huskies this weekend. But that's not why I want to talk about them. Why I want to talk about them is for the same reason you want me to talk about them. It is for one simple question and one simple question only. It is this. With the win on Saturday in an SEC stadium, did Hugh Freeze become the favorite to get the Auburn head coaching job? I don't know if he's the favorite, but I do know this. If Auburn does not make the call and try to convince this guy to leave Liberty, then they are out of their minds and they are dead wrong. And I want to talk about not only his candidacy, but something that he said on this podcast that makes me wonder if this is the type of job that he was interested in. Now, let's start with Hugh Freeze 30,000-foot view, because I do think, like, in terms of guys that have a resume that qualifies them for the Auburn job, he's one of few in college football. Now, listen, I've talked about it quite a bit. If Lane Kiffin wants the job, that's a tough thing to turn down. But Lane Kiffin was linked to 1 million jobs last year, didn't take any of them. We don't even know if any of them were offered. If Deion wants a job, going to be really tough. But Deion's never coached in the SEC, and I think Deion's great, by the way. This isn't a knock on Deion. There is only one guy that is available outside of Lane Kiffin that you know can win in this league at the highest level, and it is Hugh Freeze. At this point, the resume speaks for itself, and I know there was the off-the-field stuff with Hugh Freeze, but this is what I'll say about that. He got fired in 2016, okay? That was 6 years ago. Listen, we're living in a world now where Ime Udoka, in the middle of an investigation by one NBA franchise, could potentially get hired by another one. And so if Ime Udoka can get hired in 20 seconds by the new Brooklyn Nets, which it looks like it's going to happen. As I record, it has not happened yet. Hugh Freeze, it's been 6 years since things went south at Ole Miss. And my stance on this stuff, you guys and girls know, I'm not a moralist. If his family has forgiven him, if his daughters have forgiven him, if his wife has forgiven him, who am I to say what's right and wrong? All I know is that this guy is a great football coach, and I think he'd immediately upgrade Auburn. The resume, as I said, speaks for itself. Won multiple national championship or state championships, at the high school level. Went to an NAIA school named Lambeth, and by year 2 went 12-1. Spent 1 year at Arkansas State and won 10 games. Goes to Ole Miss in the SEC, and we know what he did there. Back-to-back New Year's Six bowl games, back-to-back wins over Nick Saban. Again, I think the stat is correct. There are only 3 people in college football currently with more than 1 win against Nick Saban: Gus Malzahn, Dabo Swinney, Hugh Freeze. Those are the only guys that have beaten them multiple times. Also, I could be mistaken. I believe he actually beat Kirby Smart in his last year at Ole Miss. So there is only one guy that has been in the SEC that has proven an ability to win at the highest levels of the SEC, and this guy is it. And I should mention, it's not like he's missed a beat at Liberty. Comes to Liberty. Keep in mind, this is a school transitioning to the FBS. This is a school that is just now starting to have a roster that looks like an FBS roster should. In year 2 during COVID, goes 10-1, wins a bowl game. In year 3, wins 8 games. He's won 8 games all 3 years, 10 wins in year 2. And right now they're 8-1, and they close the season with my UConn Huskies, which is going to be their backs up against the wall in that one. But they close with UConn and New Mexico, Virginia Tech and New Mexico State. I'm just telling you right now, they already beat Virginia Tech a few years ago. Could beat them again. They could very easily finish the regular season 11-1 overall. So this guy continues to win everywhere he goes. Went to an SEC stadium and won. He's going to finish the season with as many SEC wins as Brian Harsin and maybe Jimbo Fisher, to be perfectly honest. And on top of that, I think he is a guy that would be interested in the job. Now, I don't know it for sure, and I don't know what Auburn is willing to offer. Remember, he makes $5 million a year at Liberty now, so you're not going to get him away for free. But what I would also say is he said something very interesting on this podcast a few days ago when I asked him about jobs. Now, when I interviewed him, the Auburn job was not open, but I asked him about the interest in other jobs, and he said a few different things. I'll paraphrase and I'll cut down his quote. You can go back and listen to last Thursday's show for the whole quote, but here is what he has said about other jobs. To this point, every single time my response has been that I just don't have interest in a specific job that is called, And I don't think that's the right fit. And I kind of, in my mind, Aaron, I tell my players, and I don't know that there'll ever be a time when I leave, but if it does, it would be mine and Jill's mind, Jill's his wife. And there's only a few that we would really want to listen to that fits our culture, fits our location. In my mind, we're a college town family. I am not a big city guy. I don't belong there. And if that select few, I do kind of have a list in my mind. If they were ever to have an interest, it would be something we would certainly listen to. And I have no idea if they would even listen that we'd want to leave here because it's such a good place on the mountain. But there's very few we'd even take calls from. Call me crazy, but there's literally some I have zero interest in. And so look, I don't think Hugh Freeze is a candidate everywhere. He said, I'm not a big city guy. Well, take Georgia Tech off the list. He's making $5 million a year at Liberty. I don't think ASU and Colorado State can surpass that. But there is one program, small school, small college town in the SEC that needs a coach. And I think Auburn would be out of their mind if they did not make this guy a priority. Now, again, if Lane Kiffin wants a job, you got to sit down and have a deep – that's one. If Lane Kiffin wants a job, you got to sit down, pour yourself a drink, and really think about it. If Deion wants the job, you got to sit down and have a long drink and think about it. But if it's anybody else, go get Hugh Freeze. Now, he isn't going to come cheap. But can you imagine? Listen, just think about it like this. Hugh Freeze in a program that is in its fourth year as a FBS program. In its fourth year as an FBS program, they're 10-1 right now and just won in an SEC stadium. Now imagine sending him to a place where in the last 15 years, we have proven you can win a national championship. And imagine sending that guy there in the NIL era and the transfer portal era. Are you kidding me? It's a wrap. Just offer him the job, John Cole. What are you doing? Here's my thought on this. Couple things. One, the NIL stuff. Listen, I can't sit here and say who's doing NIL this and who's doing NIL that. What I do know, John Cohen, the AD, Ross Dellinger, who's been on this podcast before, he reported it a few days ago. Ross Dellinger said that part of the reason that John Cohen, the AD at Mississippi State, left to take the Auburn job was because Auburn's NIL setup was much better. They have millions of dollars put aside for NIL. It was interesting. I heard Bruce Pearl say this a few months ago. Bruce Pearl was asked about what facility upgrades and this and that Auburn basketball needs. And he's like, no. All of our funds should be going towards NIL to make sure our players are taken care of. One, make sure they're taken care of when they get to campus. But two, as importantly, make sure that they are taking, that other schools aren't offering them more to leave Auburn and go somewhere else. So NIL is a priority there. And the other thing I can't help but think about what Hugh Freeze could do in the transfer portal with that offense, with that defense, with what he's doing. And I think this year's going to be interesting in the portal because look, Alabama's always going to have to fill some holes. LSU, USC, not Clemson. Dabo doesn't use the portal. Ohio State, they're always going to have to fill some holes. But when I look at those teams, last year, LSU needed 20 plus guys. Last year, USC needed 20 plus guys. This year, they're not going to need that. And so I don't think the competition is going to be as good. Texas needed 20 plus guys. They're not going to need that this year either. And so when I sit there and look at what Hugh Freeze could do with the portal, listen, I'm going to go coach speak now. I can't sit here and say, I can't promise a win total for year one, but I could tell you this. They would be much more competitive than they were this year. And I'm not saying he's going to have the Brian Kelly turnaround where he's going to be in position to win the league in year one, but I think they're very much bowl eligible next year. Give him 2 or 3 recruiting cycles, give him 2 or 3 years in the portal, give him NIL. He's competing with anybody. Again, that Liberty Arkansas game should have been an audition for Hugh Freeze. If he can go into an SEC stadium and win at Liberty, I'd be terrified as an SEC school at what he can do outside of that at an SEC school. Whew, heck of a show. What a show. What a show. I think it's time for me to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Also, YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube as well. I think I said it at the beginning. As the kids say, we're on the road to 15K Let's get to 15K before the end of this month. Can we do that? Can you do that for your boy AT? Do it for your boy AT. Road to 15K. YouTube, subscribe if you're not already. That said, I think that's it. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure to rate and review the show. If you could give us a quick 5 stars, it would help us a lot. Make sure you're following our team-specific accounts. Torres on the Vols, Torres on Auburn, Torres on the Hogs, Torres on Bama, Torres on UK, Torres on UConn, Torres on Arizona, Indiana, A&M. And I think that's it. I think it's time for me to get out of here. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go. It's been a fun show. We'll be back on Tuesday. New episode. College basketball has started. I'm going to give you my national championship pick, my Final Four picks, and we'll look at some other stuff, what happens across the world of college football as well as basketball. I'll be back on Tuesday. That is all for today's show. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back Tuesday. New episode. Aaron Torres Pod.